Hello folks, and welcome to the channel. Today I'm going to be doing a video on the Baofeng UV-17 Pro GPS, and specifically I'm going to be talking about its GPS function. I've previously done a video on that, but I felt that it wasn't detailed enough. I didn't go into enough detail, and I'd really like to do another video that takes everyone through the procedure for sending GPS coordinates from one radio to another in more detail, and take it step by step, and hopefully simplify the process so that it can be understood, because it is a fairly complicated arrangement. You would think that just sending GPS coordinates from one radio to another would be a simple matter, but in the case of the Baofeng UV-17 Pro GPS, it's quite complex and involved. So I just thought I would do this video on it, and we'll try and clear up some of the errors and pitfalls that you can fall into. So without further ado, we'll get into it here. The first thing to know is that finding your GPS location on the Baofeng UV-17 Pro GPS is fairly simple. Finding your own location. The complicated part comes when you try to send a GPS location from one radio to another, and that becomes a lot more involved. Now, to find your own GPS location on a UV-17 Pro GPS is fairly straightforward. When you turn your radio on, the GPS software should automatically start up. And we will know that by looking at the screen on the 17 Pro GPS, because on the screen at the very top in the center there's a rather small and insignificant but quite important icon, and if you can see it here, it's actually like a little balloon shaped or circular icon. And in this case, it's white. It's white in colour, and if you can see it right at the top of the screen in the centre there, a little white balloon-shaped icon. Now that is your GPS icon, and if you can see that icon on the top of your screen in the centre, this means that your GPS is running on your radio. It's running in the background. So the reason that the icon is in white is because it is currently receiving a GPS satellite signal. If the icon was red, that would mean that your GPS is on and running, but it is currently not receiving a GPS satellite signal. So it's important to know that if the icon is red, your GPS is on, but it's not receiving a signal. If your icon is white, your GPS is on and it is receiving a satellite signal. So now that we've established that our GPS is on, we can also switch it off should we desire to do so. And the way to do that is via the menu on the radio. Now your menu button is the green button on the top left, and if we give it a short press, it takes us into menu, and we can come down to where it says GNSS and select that, and we'll see at the top GPS on off. If we select that, we have a choice of either on or off, so we can either have our GPS on or off. But a quick way to make sure that it's actually on is by looking for that little icon in the top of the screen. And if that icon is there, then the GPS is on and running. If it's not there, then your GPS isn't switched on, and you'll have to go into the menu in order to switch it on. Now, while we were in that GNSS menu, which is basically your GPS menu, we'll go back there and we'll have a look at the other items in there. The second item down is time zone. Now that's important that you set your time zone for the country that you're in. We're talking about GMT here with the satellite signal. So depending on which country you're in, you may have to adjust that to plus or minus whatever hours it is in front or behind of GMT in order to get the correct time on your GPS. The third item in that menu, the GNSS menu, is GPS mode. If we go down there and have a quick look there, we have the option of GPS, BDS, or GPS and BDS. I normally leave it just at GPS, but the BDS applies to Chinese satellites, so you can add that. You can either add that to the GPS. You can have GPS and BDS, so we have your ordinary satellites plus the Chinese system of satellites, or you can have BDS, the Chinese ones exclusively, or GPS exclusively. What I normally do is I leave it on GPS, which is the top option there, just GPS. If your satellite signal's not maybe good in the area you are, you could add GPS and BDS, which would give you more options. But anyway, that's enough of that. We have established that our GPS is on and running. We've got the icon in the top center of the screen, and as we can see, the icon at the minute on this particular radio is white, which means that we are receiving a GPS signal to the radio. Now, in order to find out what our GPS location is, we must activate the GPS screen on our radio. And to do that, we use the blue button in the top right, and we long press the blue button on the top right. So we give it a long press, that is, you hold it down for a couple of seconds. And up pops our GPS screen. We could call this the home screen because that's the first screen that pops up whenever you go to read your satellite position. Now, this home screen, as I would call it, is called My Place. And as the name suggests, that is where you are. That is your GPS position at the time and the place where you are. And if we look here, we can see at the top we have the time, and below that we have the north coordinates, and below that we have the west coordinates, and then below that we have the height coordinates. And to the right we have the letters GPS, and they are in green. And again, that's another indication that you are actually receiving a satellite signal, because if those letters GPS are in red, it means you're not receiving a satellite signal, and of course you won't be getting any data on the screen. But if they're in green, it means you're receiving a satellite signal. And there's your My Place GPS position. So we've got the time, the north, the west, and the height. One small comment on the height. With the Baofeng UV-17 Pro GPS, it's somewhat inaccurate. I wouldn't depend too much on the height. It can be erroneous, so I wouldn't worry about that too much. The other coordinates, however, the north and the west, are very accurate. No problem there at all, so that's good. But just a note of caution about the height. It can be wrong, it can be inaccurate. The other two are absolutely accurate. So that is how we find our GPS position on the radio. Straightforward. The only thing you have to do, blue button, top right, long press, don't short press. If you short press the blue button, you'll just toggle between the top and bottom frequencies on your radio, long press, hold down your blue button for about 2 seconds, and up will pop your My Place, your home screen, giving you your GPS coordinates. So those are your GPS coordinates for where you are at that time and place. So that's straightforward. The complication arises when we decide to try and send GPS coordinates from one radio to the other radio. Now, before we start, I'm going to mention a few caveats about doing this, because there are a couple that I have to mention that are important. One is to do with the actual radios themselves. The radios both have to be Baofeng UV-17 Pro GPS radios. There's no point in trying to send a GPS signal to a different model of Baofeng that happens to have GPS in it. In this instance, we will bring in this radio here, which is a Baofeng UV-18 Pro Max, which also happens to have GPS in it. But if you try to send GPS coordinates from a UV-17 Pro GPS to an 18 Pro Max, it won't work. Both radios have to be the same model of Baofeng, and in this case, it's the UV-17 Pro GPS. So that's one thing we have to get out of the way first and foremost. If you want to send GPS coordinates, they have to be the same model of radio, i.e. a UV-17 Pro GPS to a UV-17 Pro GPS. Another caveat concerns the firmware on these radios. Now, I actually have 4 of these radios. 2 are running version 1.27 firmware, and these 2 here are running a newer firmware, which actually has a lower number, but is actually a newer, and it's version 1.03 firmware. So, the caveat there is that in order to send GPS coordinates, you need to have the same firmware running in both radios. So, another caveat on top of that is that the older firmware, which is 1.27 and 1.28, probably will communicate with each other, but from 1.28 onwards, where we're coming into the newer firmware, i.e. from version 1.03 onwards, it will not communicate with the older firmware, i.e. 1.28 and 1.27. So that's another thing to be aware of. Both these radios here, this orange one and the green one, are running version 1.03 firmware, which, as I've said, is a newer version. Despite the numbers, you'd think it would be an older version, but it's not. 1.03 is a newer firmware than 1.27 and 1.28. So just bear that in mind, that it's best to have your radios running the same firmware, preferably identical, but as I say, 127 and 128 will probably communicate with each other, but 127 and 128 will definitely not communicate with version 1.03 and newer firmwares from that onwards. So we've got that out of the way. How do you know what firmware is on your radio? Well, a quick way to check is to again go into the menu on your radio, which is the green button top left. Give it a press, use your up arrow, and you'll see radio info. Press the green button again, and there we will have the information on the firmware version and your hardware version. The one that's concerning us is the firmware version. In this case, on this green radio, the firmware version is 1.03. Now, also at the very top of the list there, you will note that the radio says it's radio 105. And I'm not going to go into that too much at the minute, but that is important because that number has actually been programmed into the radio by myself via software. We'll get to that later, because this radio now has a unique identifying number of 105, which I have installed on the radio via the programming software. If you weren't trying to set up your radios to communicate via GPS, that wouldn't appear, because you wouldn't need to write that into the radio via the software. But we'll not worry about that too much at present. We'll just take a note of it. That is radio number 105, and the firmware version is 103. Now we can come out of that and have a look at our second radio here, the orange radio. Again, we'll check the firmware version on this one. Go into radio info, click our green button, and again we can see that we're running the same firmware on the radio. This is firmware version 103. Hardware version 130, we're not worried about hardware version. The main concern here is the firmware version. Both radios should ideally be running the same firmware version. And as you'll note in the orange radio, at the top of the list it says radio 104. On the green radio it was 105. On this orange one it's 104. So this radio has a unique identifying number of 104, which I have assigned to this radio via the software. But we'll get to that in a bit, so don't worry too much about that at the minute, but it's just worthy of note. The orange radio identifies as radio 104, the green radio identifies as radio 105, but both radios are running firmware version 103, and it's important to have both your radios running the same firmware. So they've got to be the same model of radio, UV-17 Pro GPS. They've got to be running the same version of the firmware. So we've established that these two radios are indeed both UV-17 Pro GPSs, and that they're both running the same firmware. So that's all good. We've already demonstrated how to find each radio's own GPS position. The next thing we have to do is program each individual radio in order that they have a unique identifying number. We give them a number and we give them a name. And the way we do that is via the programming software. You can't do it via the keypad. It has to be done via the software. Each radio is assigned a name and a unique identifying number. As I said already, the green one is 105, the orange one is 104. And we did that by writing that information to the radio via software. And on the subject of software, the software which I use to program these radios is called the modified CPS software. I don't use Chirp to program these radios. The reason I use the modified CPS software is that I believe that it is superior to Chirp in this particular instance for this particular model radio. I'm not saying Chirp's inferior for all radios. I'm just saying that in this case, the CPS software was developed by a lady called Terry Kennedy, who put a lot of work and effort into developing the basic CPS software for this radio to such an extent that it has become better for programming the radio than Chirp. One instance is that in Chirp you can't put in airband frequencies, but in the CPS software you can. So that's just one instance of how it's superior to Chirp. But enough said about that. I will put a link in the description of where you can download the software. The software is hosted on Mick Lower's website, and the software that you require is the UV-17 Pro GPS modified. You will see modified after the name of the radio, modified, and the latest version as of this date and time is version 1.2.5. But as I say, I'll leave a link in the description of where you can download that software. So once you've got the software downloaded and onto your radio, the next thing we want to do is actually have a look at the software. I have it currently up and running on my laptop here, so we'll go across and we'll have a look at the software. Now, you'll probably be familiar. It looks, like there's my list of frequencies that I already have programmed into one of my radios. In this case, I think this one is the green radio. Now, in order to assign a radio, as I've said previously, each radio must be assigned a name and a unique identifying number before we can transfer GPS coordinates. So how we do that is that we go into our software, and where it says window up at the top, we click on that and come down to where it says DTMF, and we click on DTMF, and this will bring up a window which basically is like an address book. I think you could describe it as that. And in there, this is where you keep the names and address, except instead of address, it's a radio ID of each radio that you wish to communicate with. So in my case, I've got 5 GPS radios, 2 UV-17 Pros with 1.27 firmware and 2 17 Pros with 1.03 firmware. And I have the 18 Pro Max in there as well. So those are actually 5 radios in total that I have written into what you could call your address book, really. Now this particular radio is radio ID 105. Now it's important that you insert a unique number in there, and in the case of the green radio, this was radio ID 105, and if we look up on the list, we'll see 17 green and the 105 beside it. So that this software here we have open at the minute relates to this radio, this green radio 105, and it's green. That's its name. So when we have assigned a unique identification number and a name to that radio, we have to write that software to the green radio, and it will have that software stored in its memory with its unique identification number and its name. Now, we have to do the same again for the green radio. We have to go in, open up the window once again, come down to DTMF, and in this case we would assign a different number to the orange radio. And this, in my case, the radio identification number for the orange radio is 104. And if we look on our list here, I have already written the ID to the orange radio. If we look up on our list, 104 refers to 17 orange 2. So because I have 2 orange radios, one is called orange 2 and one's just called orange. But it's important for every radio that you wish to communicate with via GPS, they are in this address book, and each radio is assigned a unique identification number, and it's also assigned a name. The one that I have open at the minute just happens to be the green radio. So its ID is 105 and it's called green, 105 and green. So that is how we end up getting that unique identification number in our screen whenever we go to the information screen on our radio, as I said earlier. When we look on our info screen, that explains that number at the top. When we go into radio info and we look in there, remember I said previously that wouldn't be there, radio 104. That wouldn't be there until you have written it to the radio via the software, and then that appears in your information screen. Normally you would just have the firmware version and the hardware version, but whenever you have assigned a unique identification number to your radio, it will appear in the information screen on that radio. So the orange radio is radio 104, and that information has been written to the radio's memory. In the green radio, radio information, we can see at the top, radio 105, and again we've got the firmware and the hardware version. But it's important that each radio must be assigned a unique identifying number in order for them to communicate with each other via GPS. Don't use the same number. They all have to have an individual number, and give them a name as well, just to make it easier for yourself to identify which radio you're sending the GPS info to. So that's that done. To recap, we both have UV-17 Pro GPS model radios. They're both running the same version of the firmware. We have assigned each radio a name and a unique identifying number via the software. The software that I used was the modified CPS software. So each radio has a unique name, a unique identifying number. So now, the next thing we have to do before we send GPS coordinates is that we have to make sure that each radio is on the same frequency. And in this case, we can see that I've already typed in a frequency. It doesn't matter what frequency is. It can be any frequency that the radio is capable of transmitting on. In this case, I've just put in the 70 centimeter calling channel for the UK, 433-500, and I've done it on the second radio as well. We're on 433-500. It's vital that both radios are operating on the same frequency, the same radio frequency, before we try to send GPS coordinates. So now that we've established that, both the same radio, both the same firmware, both the same radio frequency, we've assigned them a unique name and a unique identifying number. So now we're getting ready to send GPS coordinates from one radio to another. And in order to do that, both GPS screens have to be active on each radio. It's no use having your GPS screen active on one radio, sending a GPS coordinate to another radio where the GPS screen isn't active. The GPS screen has to be active on both radios. So we'll activate the GPS screen on both radios. Now, by default, both radios are showing my place. In this case, the green radio is showing its GPS location, and the orange radio is showing its GPS location, and that is identified as my place. The coordinates, of course, are the same here because both radios are beside each other. But if I was 10 miles away, obviously the GPS coordinates would be different to what's appearing on that screen. But in this example, of course, both radios are sitting beside each other, so they're both the same. But normally they wouldn't be. So the first screen that comes up is like a home screen, if you could call it that, my place, and it shows your GPS coordinates, your position, where you are at that date and time. So now what we want to do is we want to send coordinates from one radio to another. So if I want to send GPS coordinates from my orange radio to the green radio, what I would do is I would go to my scroll up and down keys. I would search through my address book, database, whatever you like to call it, until I find the green GPS radio, the green one. So I'll look through. The first radio is called black. The second radio is orange. That's my first orange radio. Third radio is an 18 Pro Max. The fourth radio is actually this radio, and it's showing its GPS coordinates there. The fifth radio in my list is green, and at the minute it says never get position. There's nothing on that screen at the minute. Now I want to get the GPS position of the green radio. So what I do is now I can press my push to talk button on the side of the orange radio. There we go. And now you'll see in the green radio I have got the GPS coordinates for the green radio. I have been able to acquire the GPS coordinates for the green radio. So that's all well and good. What now if I'm on my green radio and I want to find the GPS position of my orange radio? So once again, we go into, currently on our home screen here on the green radio. So we scroll up through our list until we come, first radio is listed as black, second radio is orange, that's my other firmware orange one. Third one is 18 Pro Max. Fourth one is orange 2, and that is this radio here. That's the orange 2 radio. Now I don't have the GPS coordinates of that orange radio at the minute. We can see here on the screen everything's all zeros. There's nothing there. And at the top it says never get position. Now I want to change that. I want to acquire the GPS coordinates of the orange radio. And in order to do that, I've selected the orange radio from the list. I press my push to talk button. And bingo, there we see on the orange screen are the GPS coordinates of the orange radio. So that's all well and good. We're able to acquire the position of each radio simply by selecting it in your list of radios. So it's all well and good having that list of coordinates. If you have a map or whatever, you could probably transfer those coordinates into the map, and you'd be able to see on the map where it is. But what if we don't have a map? What if we want to track the position of this radio from the green radio? Well, what we do then is we bring up another screen on the radio, and we bring that up by pressing the green button on the top left hand corner, and we just simply give it a quick press, and up will come this screen here, which has north, south, east and west coordinates on it. Now, because we pressed that button while we were on the orange 2 coordinates, this map is now directing us to those coordinates. At the minute, you'll see a tiny little red dot in the center of the screen. And the reason it's in the center of the screen, obviously at the minute, is because the two radios are beside each other in this demonstration. But if my orange radio was, say, 10 miles away to the east, then this little red dot would move out from the center and be along this axis here, pointing to the east. In other words, it's showing me the direction I need to move in order to find that radio. So that's how this screen works. It's like fox hunting with GPS. You'll be able to find the other radio using this north, south, east, west map and the little red dot. The little red dot refers to the other radio and its position. So that is how we find our other radio using the little screen here, the north, south, east, west screen, which we bring up, and it's directing us to how far away the other radio is. Actually, down in the corner there, it says it's 3 meters away, but it's actually not 3 meters, probably more like 3 centimeters away. But the two radios, as I say, are in this demonstration are beside each other, so this isn't going to be accurate. One radio will probably be interfering with the other, but that you get the drift here anyway. In order to find the orange radio from the green radio, we bring up this screen. The little red dot is indicating where the other radio is. Similarly, with the orange radio, we have on the screen here, we have found the green radio's GPS coordinates. If we want to find where the green radio is, using the little north-south map, we quick press our green button top left, and as we see, it's bringing up this screen again with the little red dot in the middle. And the little red dot in this case is referring to the position of the green radio. So if we follow where the little red dot is on our north, south, east and west, we are following the position of the green radio from the orange radio. So we can find the green radio from the orange radio. And obviously vice versa applies. So hopefully that has explained the functionality of the GPS function on the UV-17 Pro GPS. As I say, there are a few caveats with it. It's not just straightforward. It's very much a project in development, and hopefully further firmware releases will sort out a lot of the bugs and the idiosyncrasies that are currently included in the GPS system. But basically, just to quickly recap, in order to send GPS coordinates from one radio to another, we have to have the same model. You can't use a 17 Pro GPS with an 18 Pro Max. It won't work. They've got to be the same model. They've got to be the same firmware. In this case, we're running version 103. They've got to be on the same radio frequency. They've got to both have their GPS screens active. And of course, when you're sending the GPS coordinates from one to the other, you have to select from your list, basically your address book, which radio you want to send to. The screen that comes up, the first screen that comes up is My Place, and that refers to the GPS position of that radio, that current GPS position of that radio. Again, My Place on the orange radio refers to the current GPS position of that radio. To find the GPS coordinates of the orange radio from the green radio, we have to select the orange radio from our list. So we go into our list, our address book, if you like to call it that, and we move away from the My Place screen, move up black, orange, Pro Max, orange 2. Now that is the name of this radio, orange 2. And in order to get the GPS coordinates of orange 2, we then press our PTT button, as we have already done here, and you will receive the GPS coordinates of the orange radio. And vice versa, if you want to find the GPS coordinates of the green radio, we again go into our address book, look up through our list until we come to our green radio. Once we have selected that, we press the PTT button and we will get the GPS coordinates of the green radio displaying on our screen. In order to find the green radio, we then quick press on our green top left button, bring up our screen with the little red dot in it, and then the little red dot refers to the position of the green radio. So in order to find the green radio, we have to follow the position of the little red dot on the screen. So there you have it, folks. It's a bit quirky, it's not entirely simple, but it has caveats. As I said, same model radio, same firmware, both GPS screens have to be active, and both radios have to be on the same radio frequency. So hopefully, if you get all those things right, you should have no problem at all sending GPS coordinates between your two Baofeng radios. As I say, it's a bit quirky, it's a bit buggy. That's not entirely straightforward. Hopefully, further firmware releases will simplify the process a bit. But basically, that's what you have to do. You've got to assign each radio a unique name, an identification number. That's probably the most vital part. Each radio has its own unique name and identification number. Once you have written that to the radio's memory via the software, it will appear in the info list. The radio will have its unique identifying number. In the case of this green radio, it is 105. In the case of this orange radio, we have radio number 104. It's important that each radio has its own unique identification number and its own name. Once you have that written into the radio's memory, which forms, if you like, an address book in the radio's memory, we can then seek out whatever radio we wish to communicate with via the address book in the GPS screen. So I hope that wasn't too complicated and too involved, and I hope you were able to follow along with me there, and hopefully from now you'll be able to, as I say, send GPS coordinates between your two UV-17 Pro GPSs, be able to track the location as well as having the actual numbers. You'll be able to track the location via the little north, south, east, west screen that comes up on your GPS screen. So there you have it, folks. That's me trying to explain the GPS functionality of the UV-17 Pro GPS. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope it wasn't too confusing, and that we've cleared up any questions or queries that people may have about the GPS functionality of the UV-17 Pro GPS. So all that remains to do is to thank you very much for watching the video. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up, and feel free to subscribe to the channel if you want to. But for now, thank you very much everyone for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.